We are living in a time where trusting the government is considered patriotic. Dr. Paul says that patriotism is the willingness to stand up to your government when the government is wrong. After some research, I found out that the founding fathers felt the same way about government, and that the principles on which this great nation was founded upon were planted in this reality. In 2008, I looked to a promising candidate to put an end to this trend, to break the sequence of events that would lead to the erosion of our democracy. I was promised change. I was told to have hope. I was sold a mirage. Just a few months ago, we witnessed the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. Also known as the NDAA, giving the government the power to indefinitely detain Americans without charge or trial. Indeed. This follows years of Patriot Act extensions, the Trespass Bill, the taxpayer bailout of Wall Street, and new military entanglements. News of government activity at this stature and the people's silence is similar to an alarm clock that goes off and is constantly put on snooze. As you hear it more and don't wake immediately, you become desensitized to the sound and sleep through the alarm. Later waking up to realize that you have been asleep too long. So ladies and gentlemen, it is time that the people wake up. No more hitting snooze. It is time that we stand up and bring real change to the Oval Office. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Terps, tonight I give you hope. Tonight I bring you a man that will create this change. A man that has not been bought out by Wall Street, the corporatists, or any special interest group on Capitol Hill. A man who has predicted the financial crisis of 2008 and has a real plan to balance the budget and cut $1 trillion. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I bring you the man that will restore America. Tonight I bring you Dr. Ron Paul, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It sounds to me like freedom is popular in Maryland. I want to thank Mo for that nice introduction and this very nice welcome. It's great. The support here was obvious. Other Other campuses compete and they try to get names, but your campus got a very large, if not the largest number of signatures. But also, not only is freedom popular, it sounds like the revolution has arrived at this campus, too. Now, there are changes coming out of necessity. The changes were available to this country for a long time. We did have one revolution a long time ago. I think they forgot about it. Quite frequently, when, as a matter of fact, it happened today, I was over at the office on the Hill, and some young people came in, as they do, and there were 6 of them. I handed each out a copy of the Constitution. I signed it, and I said, at least I know you're going to read it. You might as well read it. Nobody reads it over here on the Hill. But of course, everybody's supposed to be reading it now, and they're trying to sort it out over there at the Supreme Court. They're going to come up with a constitutional answer to how far they can go with mandates. You know, this whole mandate. The mandate's horrible, and they probably have stepped across the line, but when you think about it, what is government other than a big mandate? That's all they ever do is mandate everything that we do. You know, the big issue in the health care, they've gone a little bit too far, and the people finally got annoyed and found that all it was going to do is increase expenses and decrease the quality of care. But the big thing to talk about is what can you do under the Interstate Commerce Clause? And according to the last 100 years, both Republicans and Democrats have said you can do anything you want under the Interstate Commerce Clause. But that is not what the Interstate Commerce Clause says. It was written mainly to facilitate trade between the states, to make sure you had free trade zone. So if anything, what they should be talking about right now in the Supreme Court and in Congress is why can't we use the interstate commerce to allow insurances to be sold across state lines in competition in the insurance business? There's been a lot of mandates that I've complained about. No matter what they do, every regulation, every law has a threat. If you don't obey it, you're either going to get fined a lot of money or put in prison. But what about the ultimate mandate? And it's still on the books, although it's not being enforced right now. It's still on the books that when you're 18, you have to sign up for selective service, which means they believe that they own you and that they can use you and they can put you in the military if they want to. Now, that is one mandate that we should look at carefully and get rid of, because you can't live in a free society if you have a mandate that can conscript young people to fight undeclared, unwinnable wars around the world. And we've had way too many undeclared, unwinnable wars around the world. We now have accepted a principle established with the last administration. As bad as this one is, the last one didn't do exactly a great job either. But they invented this term, and they said, oh, it's okay now to have preemptive war. Preemptive war means you can go to war and you become the aggressor. That's what they're talking about, that we have become an aggressor nation, all in the goodness of our heart, because we're going to spread our goodness around the world. You know, it... There has been something exceptional about America. We've had a great country, had a great economy, largest middle class ever, the wealthiest country. We don't have it now. Middle class is shrinking, standard of living is going down, and we're engulfed in debt. So the exceptionalism that we once had is no longer with us. But the idea that you can spread exceptionalism through force is completely wrong. What can we do? We go around, we say we're exceptional, we have good values. So we go to other countries and we say, well, this is what we want you to do. And if you do it, we'll prop up your dictator and we'll send you a lot of money. But if you don't do what we do, we're going to kill you and bomb you. Now, why shouldn't we have a third option? Why shouldn't we say, why don't we just mind our own business? And that very simply means that we don't go into nation building, we don't become the policemen of the world, but we don't become isolationists. They want to give us a bad term and say, oh, you people are just a bunch of isolationists. Guess who the isolationists are? The ones who are looking for war. They're the ones who put on the sanctions on the country that lead up to the war. I've argued the case that at the height of the Cold War, I was drafted in 1962 during the missile crisis in Cuba. And that was a tough period of time. Missiles in Cuba, missiles pointing at each other, 30,000 the Soviets had. But what did they do? They actually, Kennedy actually talked to Khrushchev and say, hey, maybe we ought to back down. Neither one of us needs a nuclear exchange. So they backed down, but they talked to each other. We refused to even talk to the Iranians. Possibly we could work something out, but this whole idea that we have to bomb and declare war and go to war against the Iranians doesn't make any sense at all, and it jeopardizes our economy. I used to mention a lot about this choice. One, we give them a lot of money. The other one, we send them bombs. But in Pakistan, actually, there's a third option that we've looked at. We are allies, so to speak, with the Pakistani government, and we give them a lot of money, billions of dollars. At the same time, we're dropping missiles and bombs on them continuously. So we do both to them. So it's time that we just look for this other option, and that is getting along with people in a lot different way. Just think of how much better things are with Vietnam. During the 60s, when I was in the service, we had the Vietnam War going on. What a tragedy. 60,000 Americans killed. The French had been there 10 years. We were there another 10 years. 1 million Vietnamese died. So we lose the war, we leave, and the reason we were there was to stop the domino effect of communism. Well, where are the communists now? It's a failed system. The Soviet system collapsed. The Chinese have become our bankers, and we trade with Vietnam. So as far as I'm concerned, this is pretty good evidence that a lot more can be achieved in peace than in war. Now, the great debate that goes on generally in Washington, as it is in the medical care, what is the degree that the government should be involved? But in foreign policy, this is the same thing. There's a big debate going on. But if they don't change policy, they say, which country should we invade next? And just pick and choose. But they endorse this whole concept of interventionism. But the whole idea of trying to write us off as being isolationists, I think it's time, now that the Cold War is over, don't you think it's about time we started trading with Cuba and traveling back and forth to Cuba? In the past 10 years, there was $4 trillion of additional debt because of the wars that have been going on. So not only is it a moral issue and a constitutional issue, it's obviously an economic issue. We didn't have to fight the Soviets. They collapsed because they had a failed economic system. But just think of what the difference would be in this country as far as prosperity and the wealth of the middle class and the ability to take care of sick people and education, all these things. What if we would have only had people in Washington, D.C. who actually had read the Constitution and followed the Constitution? You know, Article 1, Section 8 is not too difficult to read and understand, and it's very precise on how we go to war and who makes the decision. You go to war when it's declared. You don't go to war at the whims of the president or an administration. The war is declared, and that is by the people going through their representatives. But when the Secretary of Defense, Panetta, was asked the other day, where do you get this authority? You're getting ready, you know, you're in Libya, and we're in all these countries. Where do you get this authority? He says, you get it from the international governments. You get it from the United Nations or NATO. That is the giving up of national sovereignty and deferring to even bigger government. We have enough problems worrying about how big the federal government is, intrusive in our state governments and our local governments. We don't need another level of government higher up in the United Nations and the IMF and the World Bank. Now, one of my, meager proposals for the budget in the first year is to cut $1 trillion. You know that. Now that makes a lot of people nervous, and they said, oh yes, but what if all these troops come home? Won't that increase the unemployment? And cutting this money, I said, no, if you cut $1 trillion out of the budget and you bring your troops home, guess what? That money gets spent here, at home. It doesn't get spent overseas. But one example to look at statistically is what happened after World War II. There were 10 million in the military, and they wanted out of the war. It was over and done with, but the war was declared, it was won, and it was expected that the men and women would come home and get out of the service. And they did 10 million. And the Keynesian economists were wringing their hands, and they said, oh, this will be terrible. There will all be unemployment. We have to have jobs programs and all this. Well, they came home so quickly, they didn't have time to organize another jobs programs as they had going in the 30s. So guess what happened? The spending was cut by 60%, taxes went down 30%, and all of a sudden the Depression ended. So one of the myths that we have heard for so long, and we still hear it at times, is that if you have a recession and you foolishly turn it into a depression that we seem to be working on right now, that the ultimate way you get out of depressions is you have a war. And their argument is, well, everybody's employed. Sure, everybody's employed, but they're getting shot at and they're getting killed. That's a heck of a way to cut down your unemployment rate. What you need to have full employment is to get the government off our backs and out of our wallets and out of our lives and let the market work. So we want the people to spend the money, and a lot of people, in the upper half of the tax bracket say, well, the lower half doesn't pay any taxes. And I says, well, and they're complaining. They say, everybody should have to pay taxes. I said, when they tell me that the lower half doesn't pay taxes, I say, we're halfway there. But the poor, it is not fair to write it off and say, well, the poor don't pay taxes and all they do is live off the other taxpayers. Because they pay the payroll tax, which gets moved around under this current recession, but they pay the inflation tax. Some people suffer a lot more from inflation than others. If you're in the middle class or low middle income and you don't go on welfare and you try to work and take care of yourself, or you're on a fixed income or receiving Social Security, guess what? The government tells you your standard of living isn't going down, but that is not true. Your standard of living is going down because you're paying the tax which comes through the printing of money for financing all these debts. That'll be one of the first things on my agenda. Yeah, we have a ways to go, but there has been some pretty good achievements. You know, in this campaign, and to a degree in the last campaign, we've actually had the people thinking about and talking about and understanding a lot better about the Federal Reserve System. After 100 years, now the Fed is being exposed. And you know how hard they fought against the audit. But the audit actually got passed in the House of Representatives. It didn't get passed in the Senate, but we got a partial audit, and there's been lawsuits. So we know more about the Fed now than we ever have before. To some degrees, I was actually shocked when I found out. I believe I know a little bit about the Fed, but when I found out the degree that they were involved, they issued $15 trillion worth of credit in bailing out big banks. Half of it went to European banks. That'd have been much better. You know, if they were looking to get a GDP growth, they'd have been better off just passing out checks to the people and not bailing out the banks. But the Federal Reserve is a facilitator. It facilitates the growth of big government. They brag that we are the lender of last resort. We're to maintain the value of the currency, and we are to maintain low unemployment. Well, they've been not doing too great a job. The unemployment rate, when you measure everybody, and free market economists say it's 22%, and a lot of people actually believe that, so it's much higher than they tell us. Inflation rates are higher than they tell us. They say it's 2%, and everybody knows they're much higher. But the Federal Reserve has been around since, 1913, 100 years. They've destroyed 98% of the value of the $1913. I would say that we give them an F for that. They fail. But there's a lot of reasons to oppose the Federal Reserve. First, in a moral sense, it's immoral to counterfeit money, and they're the big counterfeiters. And you and I, Bastiat in the law makes a very good point. If you and I can't do it, the government should never be allowed to do it either. So, if you can't redistribute wealth by using your neighbor's money against their wishes, the government shouldn't be able to do that either. So, but the Federal Reserve actually does duplicate monetary units and does not increase wealth. It increases some people's wealth, but if you had all things even except the increase in the supply of money and credit, the inflation of the monetary system, with the destruction of the value of the money, there is a transfer of wealth. Basically, it's from the middle class to the wealthy. It's the people who get to use the money first, the large corporations, the banks, the governments, the bureaucrats, and foreign receivers of our money. They benefit the most. The people who get to use it last are the people in the middle class because they get the higher prices. So it's a very unfair system. Economically, it's a disaster because they are responsible for the business cycle. They create artificially low interest rates. They pump money into certain areas, and it's amplified by the Congress. Housing bubble is the best example of this. Excessive credit, people thinking there's a lot of savings, they build too many houses, and then we have these programs that said you must give loans to people who don't qualify, and boy, it looks like it's a golden dream because they give people houses that wouldn't have qualified otherwise, then the value of the house goes up, and they borrow against it. It looks like a cash cow. Yeah, until somebody recognizes, as many economists have, and something I had talked about, and that is, it leads to a bubble. Bubbles don't last. Bubbles burst, and then you suffer the consequences, and that is what happened. This also demonstrates the fallacy of the entitlement system. Entitlements, I would say, for the most part, are motivated by well-meaning people. People need help. We have to do that. They do need a house, so we're going to help them get a house. And so it's well-motivated. But who made a lot of money when the bubble was being blown up? It was the people who were the mortgage people, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, making bundles. Then they get into the speculative derivatives business. They make billions of dollars, and everybody's cashing in on it. But then when the predictable bubble bursts, guess what? Who got the bailout? The people we were claiming we were helping, give poor people houses, well, they were the first ones to lose their job, and they lost their house. And who got the bailout? The people who had been making the money all along. And it's all orchestrated through the Federal Reserve System because they serve special interests. That's why we have to take a quick look at the Federal Reserve. But also, if you're a defender of liberty, you want small government, because the more power a government has, the less liberty we have. So if there is a lender of last resort and we don't tax for all that we spend and we don't borrow enough, we print the money, that means if you're spending too much money for war and the Fed monetizes that debt, this facilitates entitlement system, the welfare system, as well as the welfare warfare state. It wouldn't happen without the Federal Reserve. This is why the founders were absolutely adamant about the monetary system. They say, don't print money. You can't use it. The states can use only gold and silver as legal tender because they didn't want the inflation. But I believe our goal should be, in all political action, in all our personal lives as well, that our goal should be to enhance liberty. That should be what we're all about. But the tragedy is that's not what's happening. Today it's been turned over to the lobbyists. The lobbyists are now in the business of redistributing the wealth, but the wealth is shrinking. There's a pie that's getting smaller and smaller, and every group is getting more aggressive. How are we going to get this money? How are we going to get this money? At the same time, we're producing less. We have less jobs in this country. We had 30 million new people come, in this country in the last 10 years. We've had no significant new jobs. Manufacturing, 56,000, business jobs, manufacturing businesses, not just jobs, went overseas. So this cannot be maintained. We are reaching a point where something has to give. It'll be financial, it'll be monetary, it's going to be inflationary, it's going to be the American people sick and tired of the attack on our personal liberties and invasion of our privacy. But this will end because it can't continue. If the world can keep taking our dollars and financing this debt as they are currently doing, theoretically then none of us would ever have to work again because we'll just print the money. Everybody knows that won't work, but so far it is doing it. Last year there was a record. There's some years where the Federal Reserve buys just a small amount of debt. Last year, because foreigners weren't buying so much, the Federal Reserve had to buy 61% of our debt. And they're still, by doing that, they've been able to keep the interest rates artificially low and thinking that they can get these bubbles forming again. But they cannot. So it is going to be something that your generation, this generation, has to meet up with. I've often said, but I don't say it anymore, that we can't run up these debts because we're passing them on to the next generation. That is not true. We pass them on to this generation, and we have to face the fact that this debt is overwhelming, and we have to shrink the size of government and cut the spending. And from my viewpoint, the easiest place to cut the spending should be the foreign welfare. All the spending, the foreign aid, and all the wars, we should be able to come together. And I can't give you too much encouragement to say, well, the typical conservative Republican is going to do the job, because they like that overseas spending. So it has to be a coalition of those on the right who believe in limited spending and are willing to cut the military spending, as well as people from the left. Bring people together and get together and change this foreign policy and change this spending overseas. But if we don't do that, of course, these conditions are going to get much, much worse. But we have to look at the policies overall. The policy of non-intervention, minding our own business, being friends with people and trading with people, is so much better than trying to domineer the world. But coming together should not be that difficult when you think about what freedom is all about. I am so convinced that this is the right track to take, is that freedom should bring us together. People have diverse lifestyles and they spend their money differently. But if you understand freedom and understand where this comes from, it comes in a natural or a God-given way that we get our lives and our liberties, not from our government. And But then what we want to honor and respect is the individual. That is freedom, because it's your life. You own your own life, and therefore you should own what you earn. You know, if you have right to your life and your liberty, you ought to have the right to keep the fruits of your labor. What has happened is approximately 100 years ago, this idea of liberty wasn't unified. It was sort of chopped into pieces. Some people, to a degree, defended economic liberty, but others said, oh no, economic liberty doesn't work. There's always going to be poverty, and we have to redistribute wealth. We have to regulate. We have to manipulate the monetary system. We have to plan the economy and all these things, and the evidence is in now that that doesn't work. So they don't like economic liberty. But then there's another group, they say, well, we like economic liberty, but you know, people, if you have the choice of doing anything you want with your own life, you might do some things that I don't like. Well, guess what? If you want to live, as I do, and I'm sure you do, live in a free society, one thing you have to accept is tolerance on how other people spend their money and run their own lives. But there's another little thing you have to accept, if this is true. We have a right to our life. We run our lives as we see fit. But if we make mistakes, guess what? You have to assume responsibility for your mistakes. And the main reason why it doesn't work to turn these responsibilities over to the government is the government are politicians and bureaucrats. Now, the first thing is they don't know what's best for you. They think they do, but they don't know what's best for you. This would be equivalent to having a state religion. Religion is pretty important. For most people in this country, religion is important, and our spiritual life is important. But we never for a minute assume that, oh, government, you know, they know what's best for us, so they should tell us what we should do with our spiritual life and our religious values. We don't accept that. But there are too many who want to control the way you spend your money, and too many how to control your lifestyle. So this is the reason this should bring us all together, not so much on how we use our freedoms, but we should all come together because we want our freedoms and we want to use them as we so choose. Big government obviously represents intrusion into our personal lives, and that is something that is becoming a very, very serious crisis in this country today. When you look at what's happening, it's been bad, it's been gradual over the many years because the financial privacy has been invaded a long time ago. Essentially, you don't have much privacy left, if any at all. But But you know, if you get to the point where you feel like, well, can we do about it? Well, think about what we all have done, because I'm sure many of you participated in Stop Online Privacy Act. That got stopped. So when the people get the message to Washington, they have to be aroused enough to do it, like auditing the Fed. I mean, we've gotten the people to respond. The politicians are there not because they have strong beliefs in anything, to tell you the truth, other than staying in office. So what they need to know is what you want from them in order for them to stay in office. If not, they need to leave that office if they don't come our way. But conditions in many ways have deteriorated since 9/11. 9/11 was a horrible, horrible day. I do believe that it was wrongly assessed and that there's poor understanding exactly why that came about, because the official explanation is that foreigners came here because they were religious radicals, and they attacked us because we were free and prosperous. I don't buy that. I don't buy into that. But since 9/11, it was used as an opportunity. Matter of fact, before 9/11, it was written by many neoconservatives that when the opportunity presents itself, you never let an opportunity pass to promote what they believe in. Believe me, what they did, what was the first thing they did? The media afterwards, it was invading a country that had nothing to do with it, invading Iraq. There were supposed to be weapons of mass destruction, the Al-Qaeda there. None of that was true. And just think of the loss of life and the money costs and all that's going on. Guess what? The Al-Qaeda is there now. So it's a failed policy. But when you look at the country that now we hear stories, and probably pretty good evidence who financed it, and also 15 out of the 19 came from there, and they also have radical government there that we prop up. That's Saudi Arabia. You know, that is completely, they're protected at the same time because somebody in Iraq decides that they might want to use something other than the dollar and they won't do our bidding. They have to be disposed of. So this 9/11 was just used as the excuse. The other thing that happened after that, within days, there was a bill brought back up because it had been floating around, and that was called, it was misnamed, of course, it was called the Patriot Act. So along with the Federal Reserve, we'll be repealing the Patriot Act as well. I remember the day we were voting on this, and when I went over to vote, I knew there wouldn't be very many no votes. I think there were 3 or 4 of us. But I was sitting next to another member, and he was, voting for it. And I said, "Why are you voting for this? You haven't had a chance to read it. You don't even know what's in it." And I said, "There's going to be a lot of bad stuff." And he says, I know. He says, "But it's called the Patriot Act." He says, "How am I going to go home and explain it to my people that after 9/11 I didn't vote for the Patriot Act?" I said, "Well, that's your job. Go home and explain it to them." you can be assured if you hear the name of a bill in Congress, the bill is going to do exactly opposite of what it said. Now, just think of the advantage we would have had if they'd have put the name on the bill that said and call it Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act. Maybe there would have been a few that might not have voted for it. So when we introduced the legislation to get rid of the Patriot Act, we won't call it Repeal the Patriot Act, we'll call it Restore the Fourth Amendment Act. But today we have, with the National Defense Authorization Act, we have the military now able to arrest American citizens. I mean, it goes on and on. So, and who gets to write the search warrants? The people who are marching into our houses, the FBI and the CIA and the military will be writing their own search warrants. I think the founders of this country got pretty annoyed with that when the British Army did it. So I don't know. But we've gone a long way from the principles that we've held dear. We know now as a nation that will torture, has tortured, probably still torturing it, that we assassinate American citizens and no trial. I mean, this is not what America's supposed to be about. When we recover and restore the republic, there will be a president that will not assassinate American citizens. Will not stop preemptive war, will not go to war without a declaration. And respect the principle that is as old as 1215, that is the writ of habeas corpus. Right now we're undermining that. Personal liberty in a very important way hits us every day. I mean, today, if you want to go out and buy a light bulb, and you particularly want to pick your light bulb, you don't have a choice. There's a mandate we ought to talk about as well, you know. But it's endless on what we can do and can't do. They spend a lot of time deciding who has to pay for birth control pills, you know, and whether they can put a mandate on the insurance company. You will pay for the birth control pills. No, you won't pay for it. I mean, we're getting way off on tangents on what we should be really talking about. But today, you know, if you want to buy raw milk, you might not be able to. The federal government puts prohibitions on you deciding to drink your own raw milk. So that is the nanny state that we do not need. We don't need any more nanny states. You know, I mentioned about the Interstate Commerce Clause, how it's being abused with medical care, but the abuse has been around for so long. Just think as early as 1942, that was when the courts ruled that it would be perfectly all right to prohibit you, if you lived on a farm, to raise wheat to make your own bread. And if you did, you could be fined a lot of money, and if you didn't pay the fine, you'd go to prison for raising wheat on your own farm. So this is the kind of thing. It's been incremental. The incrementalism is what we have failed to recognize. But I think the increments have been so great, and they've been expanding so rapidly, and the economy is weak. A lot of people are waking up, and I think the younger generation is certainly waking up to what's going on. And of course, there was a court case in 2005 that dealt with the Interstate Commerce Clause, and it had to do with some states believing that an American citizen should have the right by their state laws, if they wanted, for medical reasons, to grow their own marijuana and use it. They thought that would be reasonable. But the federal... But the courts came down and said, no, that is not reasonable. Interstate commerce prohibits you from doing this, and we have the right to regulate this. And but you know, in a free society, as much as I detest the use of drugs, especially prescription drugs, they are so dangerous so often. But if you have a right to decide about your eternity with your spiritual matters, and a right to read even sinister plots like communism and socialism, I think you ought to have a right to put into your own body whatever you want. Now, I might add, as a parent and a grandparent, as a physician, do it with a great deal of caution. Because in a free society, you have to take care of yourself. This notion that the government can protect us against ourselves is the principle that has to be challenged, because they can't do it, because they don't know how, and they don't have a right to do it. Of course, the big thing is a free society is far from a perfect society. You make a mistake, you suffer the consequences. But when the politician makes a mistake, everybody suffers. And that's where the real problem comes, because quite frankly, the people that I have met and the people that I know pass most of these laws aren't smart enough to tell you how you should spend your money. They shouldn't be doing that. Now, the one thing I have suggested is try to get their attention and get the attention of the American people about this mess and all this spending, because, you know, first we tax and then we borrow and then we print the money. If people are determined that they want to move along into the welfare state and the warfare state, it'd be nice if they would follow the Constitution. But since they don't, one other way we could get their attention is repeal the withholding tax. No withholding tax at all. The point being that, you know, we shouldn't be, as employers, we shouldn't be forced to be the tax collector. We shouldn't be forced to testify against ourselves. There's a lot of good reasons not to have that happen. But if you didn't change anything else except this and said, okay, every one of us has to send a check to the government to pay all the bills that are due every single month, believe me, this thing would come crashing down real fast. It wouldn't happen. People wouldn't put up with it. The wonderful thing is that we live in a great country. We lived in the richest and the freest country and the largest, most prosperous middle class. The bad news is that if we don't do something about it, it's going to say goodbye, you know. But the good news also is that the revolutionary spirit, the spirit of liberty, is alive and well, and it's growing exponentially. Frequently they'll tell us when you talk in these terms, and frequently they'll accuse me of saying, oh, you just want to go back to the dark ages. You want to go back to the gold standard, you know, commodity money, honest money. Why would you ever want to do that? Back to the old days of the Constitution. But guess what? Those who oppose us want us to go back to the old days of tyranny. Tyranny is a lot older than freedom. So it should not be difficult, when the bankruptcy comes, and we're in the midst of it now, to make a wise choice. And that's what we're in the midst of doing, making the choice. Do we want to accept this whole idea that we need more government? Yesterday we had a committee hearing, you know, on the Federal Reserve, and I said, just how can you solve the problem of debt with more debt? And they believe they can. Keynesian liberal economics believe that when you're in trouble like this, you, the people, should spend money. We're in trouble because you won't spend money. I said, yeah, but what if they don't have a job and they maxed out on their credit cards? How are they going to spend more? Well, then we spend the money. The government's supposed to spend the money. If you don't have it, you print the money. They believe that. They believe that as sincerely as I believe in the free market and sound money. They believe it, but it's not working. And that's the failure is right on their doorstep. That is why our option of resuming our efforts to promote liberty is so important. We never had a perfect society, far from it. We never had a perfect gold standard. But what we ought to do is go and pick up the pieces. And it's going to take back about 100 years to pick up the pieces, because there's been things eroding for a long time, whether it's the foreign policy of intervention, the destruction of our currency, the income tax, the welfare state. But we need to go back and pick up what we were given. You know, if we got into so much trouble by having so many people totally ignoring the Constitution, if we didn't do anything else except make the people who represent us at least read the Constitution and force them to obey the Constitution. It has been said, Benjamin Franklin said, those who expect to reap the benefits of liberty must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. It's going to take a little bit of fatigue. But I don't like to use the word sacrifice. I don't believe that you have to sacrifice. I mean, there can be some tough times for some people. But if we wouldn't have bailed out, the banks would have had a tough time, and they'd have had the depression instead of the people. If we can get the government to get out of our way and off our backs and out of our wallets and out of our personal lives, why should we call that a sacrifice? We should say, wow, we can work hard and keep what we earn. This would be an immediate effort to, you know, bring back growth again. So it isn't. It should be a wonderful time and not to something word. Like I mentioned World War II, it wasn't the disaster that they thought. We freed up the economy finally and got the government out of the business of trying to get out of the Depression. They just came back and the Depression ended. So freedom is in many ways miraculous on what it does. But to me, the real miracle is bringing people together, because, like I mentioned, freedom should bring us all together. One thing that we did wrong in this country is, and to some degree it still exists, that some people are mistreated because they belong to a group. And I can understand that. Certainly in the drug laws, there are people who are mistreated under the drug laws because they're punished in a certain way. But in the same breath, people shouldn't get special privileges because they belong to a group either. We have to see ourselves as individuals who are born with our right to our life and our liberty, and that we have a right of ownership, and that we should all come together for the same reason. That should bring us all together. It should bring us together when we need to cut back on our spending. We should agree that we don't need to be policemen of the world. We should agree that the endless entitlement system doesn't work. But these views have been well received on the campuses of the whole country. I am certainly very happy and very pleased with the reception here. There is still a campaign going on, and pay a lot of attention, because they haven't counted all the delegates yet, and that's what we're trying to get them to do. Okay. Let me let me now close by saying, you know, an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped, and this idea, the time has come, and we will march on. Sometimes they can interfere and slow us up and deal with candidates, but ideas are different. And that is what's happening. That is what I see, and I'm experiencing, I'm seeing it across the country. So be encouraged and have fun doing this, because to be despondent is being negative about freedom, and freedom is popular. Get out there and spread the message. It's in our own best interest. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Paul.
Oh, good.
We love you. Inspiration.
Okay,
Love you, President Paul.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you. Nice to see you out.
You sound like that's
I know.
My name's Ron too, so thank you very much.
Hey, very good. Good to see you.
I agree with everything that you said. Everything.
Thank you. Hey, can I get a picture with you, sir? You do.
Dr. Paul.
Hey, good to see you. Hey.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm with you through the Clarence and Record. Thank you for starting this.
Can I get a picture with that defender?
Dr. Paul, can I get a picture with you?
Do it real quick. It's going to be a short visit. I have to.
Dr. Paul.
Okay.